Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Linda Schenk and I'm the Executive Officer for Wine Communicators Australia. I'm very happy to be here with you all today and really happy to introduce our speakers, who is Sandy Hathaway, who's the Industry Analyst for Wine Australia, Rachel Trigg, the General Counsel, Brett Murphy, Program Manager, Export and Regional Wine Support Package, and we have a surprise today. Amelia Harris might join us as well, who is the Communications Manager for Export and Regional Wine Support Package from Wine Australia. Today, our speakers will provide us with an update on the Australian wine sector, state of play. It will be a comprehensive presentation on the Australian wine sector, giving an overview of supply and demand factors that affect the global market for Australian wine. Given the continued significant growth of Australian wine exports to China, this will be followed on by a broad overview of labelling requirements for Chinese market and provide tips on how to ensure protection of your brand in the market. Finally, Finally, an update on the $50 million Export and Regional Wine Support Package program. It's a very full presentation today, and with four presenters, or 3 topics in total. What we'd like you to do, if you have any questions, please look at the bottom of your screen. You can ask questions, type them into the screen, but we will hold off until each presenter has finished their section and then ask questions as they go. So feel free to ask the questions, and then I'll let the presenters know at the end of their presentation. As always, we're recording this session and we'll be providing a link to you to rewatch this presentation at your leisure later on. But seriously, that's enough from me. I'll pass it now over to Sandy.
Thanks, Linda. Hello, everyone out there in digital land. As Linda said, I'm going to be talking about the wine sector state of play, and my presentation will have 3 sections: where we are in 2018, how things are looking so far, the outlook for the next few years, and then the opportunities that present for the sector. So the state of play in 2018, I'll start where any good analyst should start, with GDP. And since the global financial crisis, we can see that GDP has been growing pretty much across the board, but the growth rates in Asia and the emerging economies, the higher growth lines here, are definitely growing faster. On the other hand, though, it's the advanced economies that have the higher per capita income, and that per capita income is growing at a faster rate. And that, of course, means they have more disposable income to spend on luxury goods such as wine. Another good indicator for analysts is exchange rates. And we've been pleased to see exchange rates have been reasonably stable for the last 18 months. You can see there the orange line, the US dollar. It is a little bit volatile, but it doesn't really go up above that 80-cent mark at all, even when Donald Trump is tweeting. Then with the British pound down here, there was that effect there where the pound dropped, which makes us less competitive, but that seems to have shaken through and that's stabilised pretty much as well. And the euro has remained pretty constant for about 4 years now. Of course, it's, can change at any time, but at the moment it looks pretty reasonable. Right, moving on to look at the alcohol market, and this slide just gives you a little bit of perspective on the market as a whole, and you can see that it's very much dominated by beer, the light blue bars, and by Asia, which consumes a fair proportion of the total alcohol, and their alcohol consumption is dominated by beer and by spirits. The important point for global alcohol consumption at the moment is it really is pretty flat overall. You can see that here with the world trends for the different colours and the different categories. Particularly wine and beer are flat overall, but then there are these pockets of growth and trends, such as in cider, which gets a lot of discussion, and they have been growing in Asia and parts of Europe at over 25%. Now, just a little break from the charts for a little while. We'll look at consumer trends over the past year. These ones come from IWSR, but they're pretty consistent with a number of groups like Euromonitor and Wine Intelligence, who've identified some major trends across alcohol over the past 12 months. And, that quote at the top, "The market is evolving at a faster rate than ever before," is a pretty good summary. It's certainly been a volatile landscape, politically, economically, regulatorily as well. And the other one is even in the physical climate, which has affected harvests this year. Another important trend that IWSR has seen is growth both in premium products, but also in the mainstream. So you've got the premiumisation trends, mainly in the mature markets like North America and Europe, but then you've also got growth in the mainstream cheaper end, where you've got the emerging economies increasing income and coming into the market. And then you've also actually got some markets where income's reduced and they're having to trade down. The rise of craft and artisan products has been significant. Consumers are interested in authenticity, provenance, anything unusual and just innovative. They're also drinking more cocktails and lighter drinks, and we've seen that with Prosecco and Rosé in the wine sector. And then even further beyond that, we've got category convergence. So going between categories. So instead of consumers thinking this is a wine occasion, this is a beer occasion, they're tending to blend that and even drink mixed drinks like Smirnoff cider and Malibu beer. And please don't ask me what either of those taste like. And then another major trend is wellness. That manifests in, for example, drinking less but better, drinking lower alcohol products, but also drinking as a treat, drinking to support mindfulness and well-being. And finally, digitisation, which has affected everything, of course, and in terms of alcohol consumption, probably particularly the digitalisation of marketing strategies. And not only that, but information presentation, so consumers are able to be more informed. And then, of course, e-commerce, which is growing very, very rapidly. Right, back to the charts, looking at wine now. Wine has, in fact, managed to increase its share of the global alcohol market at the expense of beer over the last few years. And you can also see from this chart just how small those cider and mixed drinks categories are in the scheme of things. Now, with wine, we've definitely seen premiumisation, and value growth over the past 10 years has been over 3% each year, whereas volume growth was around 1% and has now dropped even lower than that. And the growth is being driven by the Asia Pacific. Again, like the GDP growth, we're seeing 4% growth in the Asia Pacific, which just has that slightly bigger population. So that's where the numbers are coming from. And in Western Europe, consumption is actually declining. But meanwhile, while demand is just slightly increasing, supply is falling, which is a good thing. So there's been an ongoing trend, probably starting back here, where the EU gave incentives to reduce areas, and that reduction is more than twice Australia's total area. And then, you know, apart from this big harvest of Spain's back in 2013, really it's been on a declining trend. So when we come to 2017, we actually had the lowest harvest since 1961. And these very big decreases in the three big producers, France, Italy and Spain, led to an overall reduction of 8%, which is 2 billion litres, which means something like 200 plus million cases of wine not available for sale from the 2017 harvest. And Australia, in fact, was the only major producer to have an above average harvest in 2017, which saw it lift its share to 6% of the global production. And in fact, this slide tells a really good story. Australia has a history of stable conditions. If you look at the blue line, which is our average harvest over the past 12 years, there have only been 3 years that have fallen more than 10% either side of that. The first one, the last one, and the 2007 drought year. But now, in 2017, although that was in fact a record harvest, we have some 30,000 hectares fewer planted than we did back in 2006. So what we've done is increased productivity, and you can see the yield there increasing, thanks to big improvements in vine management, our R&D program supporting that sort of improvement. And it means we have the flexibility to modify our production if demand drops. So not only is Australia the 5th in global production, it's also the 5th in global exports. And in fact, it over-indexes really compared with its production. So we export, it's actually now 61% of our production, which is higher than most of our major competitors apart from Spain and Chile. And this year in particular, our exports grew very strongly, largely driven by China. You can see this chart here. This was exports 2.2 billion at the end of 2016. This is the growth, primarily coming from Northeast Asia, leading to 2.56 billion at the end of 2017. But that growth was across the board. It was in value and volume. It was in bottled and bulk. It was across all major price points and most markets. But it was definitely strongest in the $10 plus range, reflecting that premiumization trend. Strongest in China and Northeast Asia, and also strongest for red wines. And that was consistent with the production change as well, which was also driven by growth in red wines. And the really good thing is that there's definitely a correlation between rising export prices and grape prices. And we've been mapping this for some time now. And, you know, apart from a couple of years where there were particular reasons for prices to do something different, in general, they've mapped export prices very closely. And not only, you know, that's not restricted to cool climate, it's in warm climate fruit as well, particularly in the last couple of years. So the benefits are being seen across the spectrum. And then finally, in terms of the position for 2018, we'll look at stocks and sales and inventory. And this graph actually sees us in a good position because sales, I've said, they've been growing, production has been growing to match, and inventory is growing, but just gently. And that supports that increased demand because you need more inventory to support higher sales. So we are well poised going into 2018 to take advantage of the opportunities that present, which I'll now move on to. So first of all, looking at the outlook, in terms of global conditions, we see global supply likely to remain constrained, particularly this year. It's been a warm, dry winter in Europe, so they're not likely to see big harvests. The US and Australia look like being perhaps average. Certainly Australia looks like being below what it was last year. South Africa, of course, is badly affected by drought, and South America will probably improve on their terrible harvests from the last couple of years. Exchange rates, 3 of the 4 major banks back in November tipped that the Aussie dollar would finish 2018 at 75 cents. The Commonwealth said 85. So we're still well within a sort of comfort zone for that exchange rate. The political and economic environment, of course, is a little bit more uncertain. We're still yet to see the impact of Brexit as and when it actually happens. And then there's US policies that are difficult to predict, which was very clearly evidenced last week when Donald Trump announced tariffs on steel and aluminium, which would gravely affect Australian exporters if it were to go through. The exports of those are about the same as wine, about 500 million to the US. And then in terms of consumer trends, they are diverse. As I said before, you know, nothing is more certain than that they're changing more rapidly than ever before. But if there is any kind of summary, it's probably that consumer trends will be quality, not quantity. And so we should see more value growth rather than volume growth for various reasons. And lastly, in terms of environmental conditions, it is important to, of course, note the big threats of climate change, which is affecting where we can grow grapes and how we grow them. Brown Brothers have just moved a lot of their operation down to Tasmania in response to that. Grape varieties are changing. And biosecurity risks, particularly phylloxera, if that were to come into Australia in a bigger, widespread way, it would have a huge impact. And ironically, because we are doing so well and international tourism is growing so rapidly, that increases the risk, which will come about due to complacency and lack of preparation rather than because of the risk itself. Another area to look at is trade agreements in terms of global conditions. Of course, the TPP has been much in the news recently as it was signed yesterday, the day before. Thank you, Rachel. This, of course, doesn't mean it's been implemented. It's been signed, the wording's been agreed to, but it still has to be implemented. If all goes ahead and all is smooth, there are opportunities, particularly for Mexico, Vietnam, Malaysia, perhaps Peru. But none of these are clear-cut because there are already different agreements in place that will partly overlap or be replaced. And the benefits are not guaranteed because that will depend on as and when it is ratified by every country involved. And of course, important to note that two of our major competitors, New Zealand and Chile, will also benefit in any way that we benefit. On the other hand, the existing FTAs that we have with North Asia are definitely beneficial. With the China Free Trade Agreement, we've got one more step and we'll have 0 tariffs by next year. Korea, we already have 0 tariffs. And Japan, we go from 15 down to 7.5 cents in 2019. Sorry, I've not got my notes in front of me. I've probably got that wrong, but Rachel can tell us. There are other agreements currently being negotiated. The Pacific Alliance, these are in the pipeline. We don't really know what they will bring, but they are on the table at the moment. And then we're going to have to negotiate something post-Brexit with the UK and possibly the EU as well. And that might mean something too. But as our trade agreement guru, Steve Guy, says, it's very important to bear in mind that these benefits do not just automatically accrue to exporters. They're more likely to go to the importers. The exporter needs to renegotiate a price agreement with the importer in order for them to have any benefit. And I can't resist putting this one in. This is about Australia's unique strengths that see us well placed to take advantage of these opportunities. If you haven't read our State of Sector Report 2018, I really encourage you to do so. It's a great read. Talks about how our wine community it's diverse, it's authentic. We have the oldest Grenache vines in the world. We have a huge range of terroirs. We are innovative. We are versatile. We're not constrained by appellations. We're world class, which shows in the awards that we win, including an Australian wine has just been announced as the #1 brand for global wine brand power by Wine Intelligence in the whole world. I'll leave you to work out which one it is. Okay, and then looking at the opportunities that we can take advantage of, I mean, that's really depends on who you are and where you're placed. But here are some to think about. We can always build on our market advantage in China. It's hard to look past a market where growth rate last year was over 50%. The 5-year average growth rate is up around 30, and the size of the bubble shows you the volume of our exports compared with our other markets. Not only, though, is it our top market, we are the #2 importer of wine to China, and we're growing faster than most of our competitors. And the growth is across the board. It's in entry-level wines as well as in the premium wines. And there's a whole new market opening up with white wines and new wine styles as the Chinese become more adventurous. And this market, of course, is underpinned by that free trade agreement. And over the next few years, we'll see the added impetus of our $50 million package, which Brett will talk about shortly, which will further facilitate export opportunities in China. Then there's the US. Australia does very well in the US at the entry-level end, but that end is declining. And at the moment, we have a lack of penetration in the premium price segments. But on the other hand, you can see 8% growth in the $10 and over category in 2017. That's a good sign. And really, we need more Australian wineries to enter the market. Of the 238 who exported last year, all except the top, well, not all, but overall, except for the top 5, they increased in value by 14%, which is a pretty good growth rate. Meanwhile, consumer perceptions of Australian wine are improving. We have a study commissioned by us that Wine Intelligence does that looks at how Australian wine is perceived by the consumers. as a fine and expensive wine. And that perception's gone from 37% to 46% in the last 12 months. And again, the $50 million package will provide funding to support increasing that consumer demand and building sales in the premium segment. Then there's the UK, where we are absolutely number one by a country mile in the off-trade, but it's mainly at the commercial end where the market is declining and margins are tighter, and we have a smaller share of the premium end, but there's opportunity there. Again, looking at this chart, these are our growth rates in the above sort of £7, say £8 category. Our growth rates way outstrip the market overall, although they are small volume areas. We don't know yet the full implications of Brexit, but quite possibly they will be good from now on. And our latest export figures are looking very positive, but they will not be released until the middle of April, so watch this space. And then, of course, there's Australia, where we have a massive homegrown advantage. We have 86% of the domestic market. It's generally static, but it is growing in value due to premiumisation, and there are lots of pockets of growth. Pinot Gris, Pinot Noir, Rosé, of course, which goes from strength to strength. And there are other opportunities in direct-to-consumer channels and online. This chart here is winemakers up to 500 tonnes, and it's a survey that Wine Australia does each year. And a strong trend we identified last year was an investment in expanding and diversifying tourism-related activities around the cellar door. And of course, this ties in well with tourism research, Australia's research that shows a strong growth in international tourism. And a bit of food for thought. IRI latest figures have shown the top 5 alcohol products that grew last year were all kind of growing on a health-related message. And the top 3 of them were beer and the next 2 were wine. So there's a message in there for wine as well and for opportunities. But then if none of that appeals to you, then there's some opportunities elsewhere as well. This chart shows you the orange bubbles have the higher per capita consumption, but these ones here have higher growth rates in terms of their demand for wine. So, you know, pick a market there with a sweet spot between a higher growth rate and perhaps a moderate per capita consumption. And with all of those except India, Australia is currently ranked outside the top 10, so there's lots of upside there. Maybe look at alternative varieties, particularly, again, varieties that are likely to prosper in warmer and drier climates coming up. What about alternative packaging? Australia invented the cask and commercialised the screw cap, so where to next? It's got to be something that we will come up with. And of course, we are also well placed to grow organic biodynamic wines with our clean green image and our low pest status. So really then the key takeaways are that we are in a very strong position going into 2018, quite possibly the strongest we've been in for over a decade. And there are significant opportunities in a number of places over the next few years. And it's a particularly good time because of the new trade agreements and the $50 million export and regional wine support package. Of course, there are challenges, and it will be, you know, up to all of the wine community to look at how to respond to those challenges and continue to adapt to political and global uncertainties. And that's about it from me. Just to say, if you would like to know more, I do encourage you to look at our website. We have lots of reports in our Market Insights section. And also you can email us directly, marketinsights@wineaustralia.com. Ask us almost anything wine insight related, and we will get back to you directly. Thank you. Thanks, Linda.
Okay. Thanks, Sandy. Has anyone got any questions for Sandy before she changes her chair and we pass it over to Rachel? We'll just leave a little time for people to type. No questions? Okay, so thank you, Sandy.
Okay.
We'll now pass over the presentation and the microphone to Rachel Trick, who is General Counsel for Wine Australia. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Wine Communicators for the invitation to speak today, and hello to everybody out there. This presentation really is just the tip of the iceberg on all things wine regulatory related to China. There is obviously a huge amount of additional information available in the Wine Australia Export Market Guides, which if you haven't got a copy, I'd encourage you to reach out and make sure that you obtain that. I just want to start off with a little bit of a reflection as to why wine regulation is important. So there aren't actually many things that you need a license to export out of Australia. And wine's one of them. The other things, if you were wondering, are endangered animals, firearms and radioactive materials. So it begs the question as to why on earth wine fits within this category. And it really is because maintaining a robust regulatory system does ensure the truth and the reputation for truthfulness of Australian wine. And consumer confidence in wine as a product globally is extremely important to the global industry. So you lose consumer confidence in, for example, vintage variety and origin claims made in respect to wine, and you lose that consumer confidence, which could have an incredibly deleterious effect on the ongoing viability of the wine industry globally. So what do we do at Wine Australia as far as wine regulation goes? Well, we administer the export controls, we maintain the label integrity program, we make sure that Australian wine producers are complying with the blending rules. We ensure the protection of geographical indications and other terms, and we also ensure compliance with the Food Standards Code, which is the code that sets out mandatory labelling requirements and then production standards as far as permitted additives and permitted processing aids. Now, in addition to that, there is a 3-stage system to exporting wine out of Australia. So to lawfully export a wine from Australia, you must hold an export licence. Each of your products must be registered and demonstrate compliance with the Food Standards Code and the blending rules. And then you can obtain a shipping permit. Now, how this looks at a practical perspective is that for each product, you make a declaration as to compliance with the Wine Australia regulations and the Food Standards Code. And as long as Wine Australia is satisfied that your product complies, you'll be issued with something called a continuing approval number. When you come to apply for your shipment to be approved, as long as every product on that shipment has been issued with one of these unique identifying numbers, you'll be able to ship your product from Australia, and you're issued with a unique identifying number which has an algorithm applied to it by Wine Australia, and that algorithm is shared with customs. As long as customs are satisfied that that number has been issued by Wine Australia, you'll be able to get your shipment out of Australia. Now, a few points to note here. It is possible to export on somebody else's behalf. So you don't necessarily need to be the producer of the wine to export it out of Australia. If you do if you wish to allow somebody else to export your product, you can make them what's called an associated exporter, which basically gives the permission for Wine Australia to share those continuing approval numbers and for somebody else to use those. The Wine Australia regulations are going to be changed quite significantly on the 1st of April. It will make it unlawful to export on behalf of another exporter if that exporter themselves is not able to hold an export licence. So an example of this would be where the export licence of an individual has been cancelled because they've done something wrong. Somebody else won't just be able to pick up and take up where they left off and export on their behalf. There are a couple of other little things to note with the remake of these regulations. So the scope of powers available to Wine Australia in deciding whether or not to issue, cancel or suspend export licences, and also at a product level, whether to approve a product for export, will turn on matters relating to the lawful saleability of the wine in the importing country. So if you propose to export a product, for example, that might, for some reason or another, whether it's due to composition, whether it's due to labelling, or whether it's due to perhaps trademark or unfair competition matters in the importing country, Wine Australia will be able to potentially prevent those products from being exported. So it's something to note. Now, that's all at the Australia end. Obviously, every importing country has different importing requirements as well, and they're completely separate to the export requirements. So once you get your head around the process at the Australia end, you then have the added complexity of having to establish what the requirements are at the other end, from the importing country level. In China, I'd again encourage you to have a look at the China Export Market Guide, which does set out in very plain English the various additives and processing aids that are allowable there, and also the various labelling requirements. Important to note as well that to export to China, you do need 2 certificates. One of those is the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement certificate. That's available from Wine Australia or through the Chamber of Commerce. That certificate verifies that the wine has originated in Australia and allows you to take advantage of the tariff reductions under the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement. The tariff is currently at 2.8%. On the 1st of January 2019, that will be eliminated to 0. And no doubt those significant tariff reductions over the last several years have played a huge part in the growth that we've seen to wine exports to China from Australia. The other certificate that you need to lawfully import an Australian wine into China is a certificate of free sale. Now, certificate of free sale is only issued by Wine Australia, and the certificate demonstrates to the Chinese authorities that the wine can lawfully be sold in Australia. If you don't have those 2 certificates, or if you don't have the certificate of free sale, you will not be able to export into China. And one of the biggest causes of rejection that we see is inconsistency in the information obtained in these certificates and the information contained on other commercial documentation or on the wine label itself. So it's incredibly important to make sure that all of the information that's contained on these certificates is right from the outset. And a perfect example is where the name of a company has been listed without proprietary limited on the end, but the company is a proprietary limited company and is referred as a PTY Ltd company on a different piece of documentation. So extremely important to make sure that all of that information is correct. It is sometimes we do find that importers will look to place additional requirements at a commercial level, and in those circumstances it is obviously a commercial matter between your importer and yourself to make sure that you can satisfy those obligations. And it's very important to note that the production and labelling standards in China, they are different to ours, so there is no mutual acceptance agreement with China. The Wine Australia has these export market guides. They are free if you're a levy payer. There are 33 export market guides now available to exporters. And just recently we produced the China guide in Chinese as well. So if anyone is keen to obtain a copy of that, please let us know. These are the sort of things that you'll see in the Chinese wine standards. And the most significant from a rejection point of view is this sweetness indications, and also this concept of sugar-free extract. So I'll talk just a little bit about sugar-free extract first. And you'll see in the second column there, you've got dry extract minimum levels. Most of the time we see maximum levels for these sort of things, but here we've got minimum levels for a white wine, a rosé, and a red wine at 16, 17 and 18 grams per litre respectively. What this test is it's a draconian test of authenticity that was invented by the Europeans back in the 18th the 19th century. And it was basically to detect adulterated wine. And when we talk about adulterated wine, we're talking about wine that basically isn't wine at all. So it's a mixture of perhaps alcohol, flavouring, and water. And the test is designed to set a minimum level for solids in wine to verify that the product is actually produced from grapes. The problem is that in modern winemaking, with modern winemaking techniques, there's a high level of filtration that occurs. And so typically we don't have as high levels of this sugar-free extract in our wine. So you basically think about it as taking a wine and separating the water from whatever is left, and then whatever is left, subtracting the sugar from that component, and with that you come up with the sugar-free extract. Now, the additional problem here is that when the Chinese test for sugar-free extract, not only do they look at the solids, but they also need to do a calculation of the sugar concentration. Now, the sugar concentration, the method of sugar measurement that they use typically results in unrealistically high levels of sugar being detected. So, of course, you then have a situation where you take the solids in their entirety and you subtract an amount of sugar that is highly inflated, and you end up with a sugar-free extract number that's a lot lower than it actually should be. So we do, in particular with sweet wines, see a lot of these being rejected because with a sweet wine comes highly inflated results of sugar concentration and then unrealistically low levels of sugar-free extract. So how do you avoid this happening? Well, the answer really is to have the wines tested prior to export. The AWRI can do this testing for you, but then just making sure that you do have ample sugar-free extract in these wines is particularly important for Moscato type wines. The other area we see people trip up with labelling in China is with sweetness indication. So in China, you must indicate whether or not your wine is dry, semi-dry, or semi-sweet. And whether or not it falls into, which category it falls into is actually dependent not only on the sugar level, but also on the titratable acidity level. So if your wine is under 4 grams per litre of sugar, then you're fine to call it dry, but there are also certain instances that you can label your wine as dry if it is up to 9 grams per litre of sugar. But you can go up to 9 grams per litre only if the titratable acidity is within 2 grams per litre. So when you look at that example there, you could have a wine that has 9 grams per litre of residual sugar and 7 grams per litre of titratable acidity. And you're fine to call that wine dry because the two numbers are within 2 grams per litre. However, you decrease the titratable acidity level, even though it may result in the wine being perceived as being sweeter. So you've got 6 grams per litre of the titratable acidity and 9 grams per litre of residual sugar. And all of a sudden you have a wine that you're required to label as semi-dry. Until about 12 months ago, that was being interpreted whether or not the titratable acidity was more or less than the grams per litre of residual sugar. They have thankfully changed their interpretation of that, which is terrific. Trademark protection in China continues to be a problem for exporters. So our advice is always, before you even contemplate doing business in China, you engage somebody to ensure that your trademark has been protected. Registration of your trademark here in Australia, even if it has been registered for decades and you have been using it here in Australia for decades, will not afford you any form of protection in China. You should be thinking about not just registering your brand name, but also the transliteration of your brand name. And if there's a literal translation, then that should be registered as well. The Chinese system works on a first in, first served basis. There are pirates out there who scan the internet, come out to Australia, look at who's doing what, and they go straight back to China and they have these trademarks registered. And it's extremely difficult to have a trademark registration invalidated once it is registered. So absolutely encourage people to look at doing that before they even consider doing business in China. And on that note, I'll pass over to Brett.
Well, we don't leave us just yet. Sorry, we have a couple of questions for you, Rachel. The first one is certificate of free sale the same as a certificate of origin?
Okay, so no, they are different. So the certificate of free sale is the certificate that you need to obtain through Wine Australia, and that is the certificate that verifies that the wine can be freely sold within Australia. So what the Chinese authorities are looking at there is evidence that, well, if the Australians are happy to sell this and to drink this wine in Australia, then we're comfortable that it will be that it can be safely consumed and sold here in China. The chapter certificate that's the certificate of origin. So the certificate of origin is exactly that. It's a certificate verifying that the wine has been produced in Australia, and therefore allowing the exporter to be able to take advantage of those tariff reductions under the China-Australia Free Trade Agreement.
Okay. And the next question is, which resource do you recommend producers refer to for a list of permitted additives for wines imported into China?
Yeah, okay. So the best resource is the Wine Australia Export Market Guide. That sets out all of the permitted additives and processing aids, along with any limits. Most of the permitted additives and processing aids, as in Australia, are able to be added in accordance with good manufacturing practice, so being in smallest amount required to achieve the desired effect. The Chinese do typically look to the OIV for these standards. So, but generally where we have a market access issue in China, we do find that trying to change, if we're looking at an additional additive, for example, then we do find that going through the OIV is the best way to achieve that. As I said, because the Chinese look to the OIV for guidance in that respect. But the primary resource should be the Wine Australia Export Market Guide, which takes into and that information is pulled directly out of the relevant Chinese standards.
Okay, and there was one other question that was actually directed at Sandy, but maybe you'll know as well. The question was, is France still the largest importer into China?
Yes.
Sandy's nodding yes.
But we're very close.
Excellent, thank you.
Great.
Well, we will now hand over to Brett, who I think is going to share his presentation with Amelia as well, but we'll see how we go. So are you all good to go, Brett?
Yes, absolutely. As soon as I move Rachel's laptop out the way. Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for having me as well. Really just wanted to take the opportunity to share a bit of information about the Export and Regional Wine Support Package. I'll probably just spend a couple of minutes taking everybody through the structure of the package, the various programs that we're delivering through that. Hopefully, with the communications that we've had through our website and lots of other forums, most people on the call are reasonably familiar. But just to bring anybody up to speed who's sort of not across the package in general. And then spend a few minutes updating everybody on where we're at with the delivery in the various programs. So what is the $50 million package? It's $50 million of federal government grant money that's basically been allocated to Wine Australia to administer the delivery over the 4 years. And two sort of real headline acts, I guess, in terms of that investment and what we're trying to achieve out of it. That's significant growth in wine exports and significant growth in inbound international visitors to our wine regions. So hence why the four programs within the package are basically aimed and spread across those sort of two key level objectives. So our first program, and where you can see sort of 3/5 of the money roughly being invested in there, is in the China and USA marketing program. So the first year of the package involved a considerable amount of sector consultation, stakeholders, sort of really from all elements of the sector, and it was determined through those consultation processes that in order to achieve the sort of export growth that we were targeting, that the bulk of that would really come through growth in China and the USA, and hence why those two markets have ended up being the target markets there. There's also of that $32.5 million, $2.5 million of it is focused on an international tourism campaign, which I'll touch on a little bit further in a couple of slides' time. The program 2 is the capability development program. So that's where we're really looking to develop education programs to help those that are looking to either get into marketing or wine tourism, or to expand their footprint in export or in their tourism offerings, opportunities to participate in some education programs that are currently or about to start development, in order to assist those that would really like to move their businesses in that sort of direction. And I guess also then to be able to, to take advantage of the, at least in the marketing case, of the investment that's being implemented through Program 1. The grants program, which has perhaps been the most publicly visible in terms of what's going on there to date, has got a couple of elements to it. So there's $1 million of wine export grants aimed at being able to provide some assistance to small and medium wine businesses to participate in overseas marketing activities predominantly, to help capture those export opportunities that we're trying to engender in China and the US. And then there's the state and competitive grants, which are addressing our tourism objective. So there's $5 million worth of state-based grants and $5 million of competitive grants focused on international tourism activities. And again, I'll go into a little bit more detail in a subsequent slide there. Finally, we don't want to forget our good friends in cider. So there's a $500,000 investment in Australian craft cider industry, developing a brand proposition for at the category level and go-to-market strategy to really try and help the craft cider producers increase their export capabilities as well. So overall, some of the key benefits that we're trying to deliver to the wine sector through the package, again, that real significant growth in wine exports in our key international markets, especially China and the USA. Support wine businesses to be able to participate in our international wine trade events, whether they be events that are being run by Wine Australia or facilitated by Wine Australia, or any other international wine trade events that are relevant there. Individual wine businesses can apply for the wine export grants up to $25,000 for 50% of their eligible export promotion expenses. So some direct cash support for eligible businesses on that one. The wine tourism initiatives, so these are really more targeted at the regional type level. And access to the export and tourism capability building workshops, which will be available in a number of, and delivery will be through a number of different mechanisms to make them as absolutely widely accessible as we can to those interested in taking advantage of those. So some of the headline areas where the investment's going in Program 1, so in the marketing. We've got our $1.5 million co-investment with Tourism Australia. Hopefully everybody's seen the Dundee ad that was run during the Super Bowl by now. There was a series of teasers in the lead up to that, and in the last week there's also been release of online the chat show sort of style format. So the Food and Wine one with Curtis Stone about a 1.5 minute grab. He's being interviewed by Danny McBride, the US actor who played the son of Crocodile Dundee in the main advertisement. So that campaign will be ongoing, and all of the results to date have actually been ahead of those that were projected and targeted through Tourism Australia. So there's a high degree of optimism about the success of that campaign, albeit very early days, and obviously the success will ultimately be measured by the number of tourists that we get, which we'll only find out in 6 to 12 months from now. The key messaging campaign. So this is a really significant investment in with an agency. That agency has actually just been appointed within the last week or so. There'll be in around a month's time. So we're working through with the agency now some of the initial collateral on that. There'll be a big rollout of that at VinExpo Hong Kong in May. But that's really exciting, and again, I guess it's just one of those things where with getting that $50 million investment, it just allows us to do things on a scale that we haven't been able to previously, and we couldn't have dreamed of really engaging an agency in the US for the US and China markets, let alone on this sort of scale without this investment. So watch this space on that one. And then from an upcoming events point of view, we've actually just had VinExpo New York was held last week. Great turnout, participation from our wineries over there, and we've had very positive feedback on the Wine Australia stand. Next week is the China Food and Drinks Fair in Chengdu, and then VinExpo Hong Kong and China Roadshow, I guess, are really sort of the pinnacle events for us in this 12-month period for the package. 130 wineries joining us in Hong Kong for VinExpo, and leading into the China Roadshow after that, plus the launch of our key messaging campaign. So that's going to be huge. And then in July in the US, Australian Wine Camp. So this is a brand new initiative. And again, the package investment just allows us to do these sorts of things. One of our challenges with the US market has been getting the key influencers to make the investment and the time to come over Australia and see all of the wonderful things that we have to offer in our wine region. So Australian Wine Camp is all about taking Australia to the US to give them a really immersive Australian experience over there. So again, very excited about that one. The grants, the tourism grants closed Friday week ago. We are currently working our way through the eligibility assessments of those. Probably can't share too much detail in terms of specifics of numbers, but we were actually really pleased with the level of response. And when you look at the coverage of all of the different applications, I think one of the great things is when you actually see sort of the level of saturation and different ideas. So the sum of the parts, I think, is hugely positive there. Our expert assessment panel meets for the first time this weekend, working on a Sunday, Monday, and for those of you who have applied and are eagerly awaiting results, then it'll be an April sort of time frame that we expect that we'll be able to start communicating on the success of applications. The wine export grants remain open until the expiration of the $1 million or May 2020, whichever one comes first. We're expecting that we'll start to get a bit of an influx of applications with VinExpo New York now having been held, and certainly with the VinExpo Hong Kong and China Roadshow. Capability development, our wine export capability RFP closed again on the 2nd of March, so about a week and a half ago. We're going through a shortlisting process of the responses that we had from 6 suppliers on that one. Looking to have presentations with a short list of those next week. So it's likely to be an April timeframe for the export capability program that will start development, and certainly hoping that we'll actually be able to be rolling out the first workshops and material and so forth well before the end of this calendar year on that one. And the tourism capability building program is currently still open. RFP close this Friday. So again, we'll be in assessment mode of those for the couple of weeks after that, with a target of May to commence the development of that program. And last but not least, Cider. We've appointed Guy Taylor as the preferred supplier for the brand proposition for the Cider program, and that actually kicked off last week. So we're in delivery mode for the Cider brand proposition. There's also been a considerable amount of market analysis that's been done there. So the Cider guys have selected 13 markets that they're now looking to drill into a bit more detail to determine where they're going to focus their go-to-market strategies. And if I can, I'll just quickly hand over to Amelia, our communications manager, for the last couple of slides to let you know how to stay in touch.
Hi everyone, I'll keep it very brief now that we're approaching 1:30, but just a quick opportunity to introduce myself and just remind you that there's a dedicated 50 million package section on our website. If you go to the landing page on the Wine Australia website, and the top navigation pane, you'll see a 50 million package little button. Click on that, and on the sidebar of the page, there's regular updates on each of the 4 programs. And just want to highlight also that we have a dedicated 50 million package e-newsletter. So make sure you subscribe to that one. I've highlighted on this slide here where you can subscribe. But make sure, as there are various e-newsletters coming out from Wine Australia, just make sure you select Export and Regional Wine Support Package to ensure you get all the updates that will be forthcoming in the next few months. Thanks very much.
Aha, okay. Before you go, we have some questions for you. I don't mind who answers them. Can we have a look at the questions, please, Mike? Firstly, okay, the first question is can you announce who the agency is that you'll be working with?
Can't right now. That announcement will come out very, very shortly though. So yeah, can't steal the thunder. There's just a little bit of commercial and confidence element to that right now, but that announcement will be reasonably imminent.
And will the wine export grant still be available at the time of Vinexpo Hong Kong?
That's a fantastic question, and I wish I could give a straight answer to that, but it's impossible. We just simply cannot predict exactly the volume and eligibility and so forth of applications that we'll get. What I would say is on the Wine Australia on the website that Amelia was just referring to. We are keeping an up-to-date ticker, if you like, on the countdown from the $1 million that was available. So watch that one closely, and that will give you the most up-to-date information on the amount of funds that are currently available. So what I would say is at this point we've actually only had 2 export grant applications which are currently going through assessment. I imagine we'll get a bit of an influx in the next week or so as people start to get back from the US, for those that have been there for Vinexpo New York. So yeah, keep an eye on that over the next month, and that'll give you a good indication as to the funds leading into Hong Kong.
Excellent. This is not a question, this is actually a statement from the chairman of the board from WCA, who's obviously spent his hour listening to your presentation, and he said, this is a great presentation, Wine Australia, well done. So I concur with that. I'd like to thank you all. Thank you to our lovely presenters today, for all 4 of you from Wine Australia. And thank you also for all of you who have attended today's webinar. We really appreciate your time. If you wanting to join us for our next webinar, it will be held on the 10th of April. We'll be hearing from a company by the name of Honey and Fox. If you are a WCA winery and/or business member, we're holding a special webinar for winery and business members about family succession planning, to be held on the 20th of March with Finlayson's lawyers. But until then, hope you have a great month, and thanks so much for coming. Cheers.